LOL.
That guy kind of looks like
Earlier
Stipe
this week.
Miocic.
He looks like who?
Stipe Miocic, the former UFC champ. I don't know why I thought that, but he really does.
Interesting. I don't know who that is, but that's funny. Also, does anyone in the chat let us know if any of you guys watch Matt Walsh? Does he start all of his videos like this? Is that just for this video? Or is that just how all of his videos start? Some random white guy that looks like he's in the middle of taking a shit with the word canceled. Like, what's going on here?
Earlier this week, we discussed our pathetic, impotent criminal justice system, which has utterly failed to maintain law and order in our communities. It's a justice system that seems to be uninterested in justice. And I proposed, as you recall, that we take off the kid gloves and start dealing harshly with criminals, predators, those who've turned our cities into reeking, zombified wastelands. In fact,
and by the way, obviously, I'll remind everyone that the United States of America is the most incarcerated country in the world. By no metric whatsoever have we failed to adequately or harshly punish criminals. In fact, quite the opposite. And, even if we did round up more quote unquote criminals, even if we did incarcerate more people in this country, it's not going to fix the underlying systemic foundational issues which cause these crimes to occur in the first place. You can't incarcerate your way out of the systemic failures, which again lead to these crimes of desperation. You can double every police budget in every major city and build twice as many prisons. And it's not going to do anything, because as long as people are starving, they're going to be, stealing food. As long as there's crises that, mental health crises, which cause people to depend on drugs, you're going to have people committing drug crimes, quote unquote. In no way can you incarcerate your way out of this problem, or just punish all the criminals and then the problem will go away. That's simply not going to happen.
But that's where Matt's gotcha. He doesn't want to throw them in jail. He just wants to wide scale execute them all. So yeah, that he's like, no, you're right. Prisons are broken. I just want to round up every last poor person or anybody that I'm remotely skeptical of and send them to the meat grinder. I want to send Matt Walsh to the meat grinder instead. That's my position.
I advocated that we adopt some of Singapore's strategies in this regard, strategies that have helped to make Singapore one of the safest and cleanest places in the world, while our cities look like massive drug-infested garbage dumps. Specifically, I believe that we, like Singapore, should adopt corporal punishment for thieves and robbers and vandals and the like. And, we used to use corporal punishment on kids in school. Now we've decided that it's too mean to even use on multiply convicted felons. And I find that attitude absurd and weak. The criminals also find our justice system absurd and weak, which is why they have no respect for it and they have no fear of breaking its laws. And I also believe that we, like Singapore and like Donald Trump has frequently suggested for this country, we ought to expand our capital punishment regime to include drug traffickers, those who distribute and sell mass amounts of poison, slowly killing thousands of people every year, ought to face the ultimate penalty. Nearly every murderer who has ever been executed in the United States inflicted less damage and killed fewer people than the most prolific drug traffickers. There's no reason why drug traffickers should get a more lenient sentence. Indeed, there's no reason why the death penalty should be reserved only for those who directly kill people. Sometimes the most heinous kinds of predators have other ways of preying upon their fellow human beings. Child rapists would be another example. With our ridiculous laws as they stand in most states, you can't execute a child rapist unless they're also guilty of murder, as if the crime of child rape itself doesn't warrant it. I mean, they deserve to die for their crimes, whether they directly kill their victims or not. This is the case I made, and I explain my logic, I think, in extensive detail. Still, it has
Can we pause it for 1 second?
Not surprisingly controversial.
This dude has no nuts at all, because if he actually believed this shit, he would be making every video about Prince Andrew every single fucking day about how he needed to be put to death for his crimes. He would be coming after Les Wexner of fucking Victoria's Secret, who is undoubtedly able to be convicted of having sex with minors, multiple occasions of it. Okay, but he has no balls. So instead, he's trying to wrap this in as, oh, it's drug dealers, oh, it's drag queens, right? Like, he doesn't actually give a single fuck about protecting your children. What he's doing is he's creating an image of the most like fucking odious, vile, disgusting person in the world, and being like, why can't we just kill that guy, as a way of opening the door to being like, see, that person is addicted to drugs and they're just on the street. Now let's kill that guy too, and then the problem will be gone, right? That's how they start to plant these seeds. Like, first it was the LGBTQ community exclusively, because they thought that that was an easy niche to extract from. They would pretend that drag queens and trans people were all groomers and coming for your children. Then they've moved on from that. Now it's drug dealers, and now it's just like anybody that they can portray as somebody that's coming for your children. We're going to put those people to death. Remember, obviously, every child sex criminal deserves severe punishment, right? But this guy isn't really concerned about that. He's interested in expanding the capital punishment laws so that he can then apply them to way more people than we would ever actively fucking believe in. Like, you could probably get me and Gavin to nod our heads along and be like, well, this guy raped like 30 children. Jesus Christ. He probably shouldn't come. Yeah, we'll turn our backs to that guy, take him out behind the chemical sheds and do some vigilante justice. I'm not going to shed a tear, right? But when you're talking about changing the institutions of power to allow nefarious actors and fascist sympathizers like Matt Walsh to manipulate them to allow more people to be murdered by the state, a racist, fucking unjust system that we have here, absolutely absurd. And I'll remind everybody that 1 to 5% of all people found guilty of the death penalty were innocent. So we are also killing innocent people in this country today, and that's with our very narrow allotments for execution.
Right. Plus, also, we have to address the insane hypocrisy here when it comes to gay people, for example, and gay marriage. People like Matt Walsh are the first to bring their biblical values into play and talk about how, well, I don't have any problem with gay people, but God says it's not cool, and therefore I think we should legislate gay marriage out of existence. But then when it comes to capital fucking punishment, state-sanctioned executions of human beings for whatever crime, he somehow seems to conveniently forget the fucking 10 Commandments. Let's not forget that the number 6 commandment of the 10 Commandments is "You shall not murder." Did they ever address this hypocrisy? You would think that the literal 10 Commandments saying to not murder people, that killing is not acceptable, would conflict with his stated desire to increase the amount of state-sponsored executions. Does anyone know if he's addressed this hypocrisy, if he has in any way tried to grapple with this cognitive dissonance? Because again, this is the first guy to cite the Bible and to cite his Christian values and to say that America should be constructed with a biblical, backbone and all this crap. But when it comes to executions and murder, somehow we need to up the ante.
People on both sides of the political divide are deeply scandalized by my argument. Twitter has been basically unusable for me over the past few days. Well, it's always basically unusable, but especially over the past few days, because my entire feed is just people screaming at me for wanting to punish criminals. Now, look, it's okay if you disagree with me. I will give you permission until my theocratic fascist regime officially begins. Anyway, for now, you do have permission to disagree with me. You're wrong, but that's okay. You can be wrong. My problem is not that people simply disagree with my proposal, but that they treat the mere notion of harsher penalties for criminals as somehow absurd on its face. They recoil at the suggestion that those who traffic substances that kill thousands every year should be given the same punishment that we already give to other kinds of murderers. They scream out in horror at the very idea that perhaps we should sentence robbers and thieves to corporal punishment rather than letting them hang out in prison for a few months and then releasing them right back into the community with no additional penalties. This is the issue.
For a second.
You're not a stupid person.
Just really quickly, I want to remind everybody that if they had any concept of how the justice system or the criminal incarceral system works in this country, they wouldn't have to lie to you about how it is. Like, oh, do you think that we're actually just like that with no consequences you can go do home invasion burglary and get back on the street and no consequences for you? Like, he wouldn't have to lie about this shit if he wasn't selling you an empty bill of goods, right? He's selling you snake oil, and that's why he has to pretend that our system is different than it is, when, as Gavin pointed out earlier, we have 25% of the world's prison population, only 5% of its fucking people.
Absolutely correct. 100% correct. And also, just to address this, JR Jr. says, hot take, even murderers shouldn't get the death penalty. Of course not. Of course not. No one should get the death penalty. And even in the most extreme examples, like Zach said, if someone raped 30 kids or someone's a serial killer, it's easy to sympathize with the logic behind the death penalty and be like, yeah, fuck that guy. Like, why should we expend taxpayer money keeping this person alive when obviously they deserve death? I think we can all understand the logic behind that. Again, if you're a serial rapist or something like that. But actually, it's estimated that about 4% of people that received the death penalty or that were on death row were and are likely innocent. And that's not talked about enough. And that's the main reason, actually, that I'm against the death penalty. Again, I can understand the logic of it. Some people, it's like, fuck them. Like, I don't care if this person lives or dies. They probably do deserve death. But the fact that up to 4%, even if that was just 0.5%, that would still be too many people. A system which leads to the execution of any innocent individuals cannot be sustained.
100%. And on top of all of that, right? Because I've seen a decent number of people in the chat that are like, oh, you can kill rapers and child molesters and all that kind of stuff. It's like, bro, do you really want to take the absolute, what we all agree is a corrupt, horseshit, bloodthirsty police force, a domestic terror organization, and a corrupt judicial system that will stop at nothing but to protect the rich and powerful and exploit the poor and marginalized? Do you want to give them the power to execute people, to take away human life more than they already have? No, you shouldn't do that. This is an untrustworthy, like, everybody wants to assume that, like, when you change these laws, we're dealing with some sort of like perfect system, right? Like when they say they support the death penalty, they're like, oh yeah, we're going to go after the Ted Bundys, right? Like, we're going to go after the Jeffrey Dahmers. Those are going to be the guys that get put to death, right? You know who does get put to death? Poor broke guys in Mississippi, okay? Wrong place, wrong time. Their life is over. Maybe they had a gun on them. Maybe somebody took that gun and fucking killed somebody. You don't know. Maybe they fucking killed somebody, but you don't know the circumstances of that. It's never going to come out in trial. Those are the guys that get put to death.
Yep.
For listening to my argument, finding it unpersuasive, and making a counter argument. That's fine. But you are, frankly, pretty damn stupid if my argument is so shocking to you that you can barely articulate a response, or if you think it's so unthinkably extreme that it isn't necessary to articulate a response. That kind of reaction to a perfectly reasonable suggestion, one with a massive amount of historical precedent, shows a lack of thought on your part and an inability to even entertain any challenge to modern orthodoxies, because that's really the problem, right? Is that what I'm saying flies in the face of our kind of generally accepted notions of how to deal with criminals. And for that reason alone, many people are upset by it. They can't explain really why. It just doesn't comport with what they've always been told and sort of the general atmosphere that they live in. Speaking of people who can barely articulate a response, that brings us to YouTuber Kyle Kulinski, who's the owner of the Secular Talk channel on YouTube. And like most YouTubers on the left, every so often Kyle likes to use my name to drive engagement. And every so often I will respond because, well, I can't help but take the bait. So yesterday, Kyle put out a video titled "Matt Walsh's Fascist Mask Slips on Twitter." And he's part of the mob, terribly upset about my comments, though he, like the rest of them, can't quite explain why. Now, most of Kyle's video consists of him calling me stupid and authoritarian while making incredulous facial expressions. Not really a counter argument, not much to respond to. But I did want to address one part of it, and it's this part. Listen.
Singapore is able to have nice things in part because they execute drug dealers by hanging and arrest even petty vandals and thieves and beat them with a cane until they bleed. We don't have nice things because we aren't willing to do what is required to maintain them. And then he goes on to say, there are some accusing me of advocating similar laws in this country, and I just want to clarify that, yes, absolutely, I want those laws in this country. Okay. Matt Walsh is an authoritarian. And it's hilarious because the Daily Wire, Matt Walsh, and others like to go after the left and say, oh, the left are authoritarians and they hate freedom, bro. They hate liberty, bro. You hate freedom. You hate liberty. Part of freedom is being able to put in your body whatever you want to put in your body as long as you're not hurting anybody else. Being able to sell said substances. In the same way, I don't think we should be hauling away the CEO of Budweiser in handcuffs. I don't think you should haul away the weed dealer. He's saying execute drug dealers. All right, dog. You want to start? Go find the CEO of Pfizer and Moderna. Go find the guys who make Xanax.
Okay, sounds good to me. I mean, we'd have to give the big pharma executives a fair trial, of course, convict them in a court of law. But once that's been done, I absolutely would want them to face the same penalty that should be imposed on any other drug trafficker. See, Kyle, you're not going to trip me up by demanding that I take my arguments to their logical conclusions, because I will always do that. I'm not afraid of doing that.
Can we pause this for 1 second?
Being logically consistent.
That's a horrifying thing for this man to say, bro. Oh my God. You don't have to take my arguments to their logical conclusion, bro. I already did all that shit. You already took your plan to kill the poor to the fucking and the drug dealers to the logical. You're down for it all. You're just down to turn this country into like a fucking ginormous Holocaust, essentially, where we wrangle up everybody you don't like and then fucking give them a sham trial and then put them to death. That you've already taken that to its logical conclusion and you're snickering and you're talking about how, yeah, everybody would just be crazy to not agree with me. Let's just fucking go ahead and get that party started. Like, you are literally an unwell man, Matt Walsh.
Yeah. Plus, obviously, the point that Kyle was making was not that we should execute the CEO of Anheuser-Busch. No, Kyle thinks that drugs should be legal and regulated and taxed so that people can consume them in a safe way, so that it won't lead to the deaths of these individuals that end up getting tainted stuff or end up having to buy fentanyl because they can't get their hands on actual heroin, et cetera, et cetera. Kyle's point is not that we shouldn't allow the sale of beer and of opiates and, you know, cocaine and so on and so forth. He's saying that in a system where these drugs were taxed and regulated, we wouldn't have to worry about people getting tainted stuff and it leading to the poisoning of communities that Matt Walsh is referring to here when he talks about fentanyl flowing in from China and so on and so forth.
100%.
Okay, so when you say, well, if that's how you feel, then that would lead to this. Sure, sounds good to me. Let's do that too. It's an advantage of being logically consistent that you yourself do not enjoy, because you have already made a number of statements that I'm quite sure you would not want to apply with total consistency. So you say that part of freedom is not only being able to put whatever you want into your body, but also being able to sell anything that someone else might want to put in their body.
Okay, Mr. Libertarian.
Now, here's the problem. This argument already assumes that freedom is itself the highest good, and therefore literally anything that falls under the banner of freedom is automatically good and should be permissible. But that's a case you need to make. Okay, you can't merely assume that. You haven't made it here, or as far as I know, anywhere else. See, I don't believe that freedom is the highest good. I don't think that the ideal society is one where people are simply able to do whatever they want all the time. I don't really think that you think that either, actually. I'm quite sure that there are things that you would say people should not be free to do. I'm quite sure of that. And yet your whole argument rests on simply labeling.
My argument would say that you're not allowed to do anything that would make other people's lives worse. Unless it's between two consenting parties, right? Like, okay, are you allowed to go out and knock somebody unconscious in the street if they didn't fucking consent to that? Like, obviously not. That's a crime. But do I haul people to jail because they had a consenting boxing match and were two individuals competing in sport? No. So, yeah, if I fucking pull some guy's pants down and inject him with fentanyl on the subway, like, yeah, then I probably deserve to go to jail for that. But if I sell a guy a fucking line of coke that was something that he was interested in buying, like, do I think that guy really needs to go to jail forever? Like, No, probably not. If we had a better system how to regulate how to get coke in this country, we weren't buying it from cartels that did all their business with machine guns, we might not have to deal with it that way. You know what I'm saying? It's these obvious problems where once you start criminalization, you have to work with the criminal underbelly. This is how the mafia got started, guys. There was no way for these Italians to make ends meet with fucking and immigrants writ large, right? To make ends meet the way that all the other Americans were doing when they were just worker bees that were being exploited, stepped on by the capitalist machine. So what did they do? They went ahead and got some extra on the side, and now they needed a protection. They needed a police force because you can't go to the regular police, but I can't have somebody fucking beating up my butcher shop just because I'm doing a little bit of action on the side. I can't have some crazy guy coming in here trying to collect. So you got to have, you know, your Tony Soprano on the side with the muscle to come in here and take care of it for you. This is the kind of problems that you create when you start to create like layers and layers and layers of criminality. That's why, as a civil libertarian, I support freedom for all individuals, you know, until they are directly harming somebody in an unconsensual fashion, whether that's drug abuse, physical content, sexual content, etc. You should be liberated and free to do all of those things unless you are directly traumatizing or harming another individual.
Drug trafficking part of freedom. So already we have a number of logical inconsistencies and sort of half-baked ideas. Well, let's talk about drug traffickers for a moment. Now, you keep making this. You want to make this about weed, first of all, and I noticed that with all the people that are arguing with me, talk about drug traffickers. All they want to do is talk about weed. They bring it right to weed. I didn't specifically say that. I said drug traffickers. Okay, and you do that because you know you'd sound ridiculous defending fentanyl dealers on the basis.
LOL. Yeah, they want to make it all about weed, and you want to make it all about fucking fentanyl, obviously, which is ridiculous because the only reason why anyone takes fentanyl is because they can't get their hands on actual heroin. No heroin addict wants to be doing fentanyl instead of heroin. You know, you can literally talk to anyone that's on fentanyl, and they're only taking fentanyl because they can't get the actual shit. And the reason why they can't get that is because it's not available to them in a legal and regulated form. If it was, they wouldn't be buying fucking fentanyl off the street, and they wouldn't have to worry about their heroin being potentially cut with fentanyl, which is exponentially more deadly and harmful. And people should be able to consume opiates, in my opinion. I think that that's a drug that people should be able to legally get their hands on if they want to. Again, I'm also a civil libertarian. I think people should get to decide what drugs they put in their body. But again, don't get it twisted. The only reason why anyone dies of fentanyl overdoses is because of the fact that drugs aren't legal.